Good morning, everyone. My name is Helēna Matosa. I'm a senior project manager at Infraestruturas de Portugal. So Infraestruturas Portugal, in English, it will be Infrastructures of Portugal. We are a public company responsible for the planning, construction, and maintenance of the roads and railway networks in Portugal. So I'm a senior project manager, and currently I'm responsible for the management and the coordination of the Portuguese high-speed rail project. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in this conference. I apologize for not being physically in Latvia. It was really impossible to me. Hopefully one day I will be able to visit the country. I'm very pleased to be here showcasing our high-speed project and hopefully to share some useful insights with you guys that can help you on the Rail Baltica project. So I've got here a short presentation about our project and how we have used the PPP model to fast-track the success and to achieve the very tight timescales we have to implement this project. So, first of all, I would like to start by giving you an overview of our transport networks, of the quality of our transport networks. And by this, I mean the quality of our roads and the quality of our railways. So the indicators I've got in here, they come from the Global Competitiveness Report that is prepared by the World Economic Forum. So this is from their last report. And they show that at the European level, Portugal has the third best road network in Europe, what is a very, very impressive result for a small country like Portugal. But we rank 13th in terms of the quality of our railway infrastructure. So what is one of the main reasons that our roads are so good? So So the development of the Portuguese highway network started in the early 90s. So if you see on this chart to the right, in 1990, the number of kilometers, the extension of our highway network was very small. We had around 500 kilometers, less than that. But then between 1995 and 2010, the extension of our highway network increased to almost 3,000 kilometers. And this is because our government awarded 21 PPP contracts for development of almost 2,500 kilometers of highways. So it was a lot of work, a lot of construction that was done in 15 years through the PPP models. So there were several lessons learned from this program. Some of them were very positive. Of course, as I showed in the slide before, we have one of the best networks in Europe, but there's also a lot of negative points that come from this experience. And in everything in life, I think we should learn from the positives and avoid to repeat what went wrong. So what went essentially wrong is because I think we went a bit too far with this idea of, okay, let's buy now and pay later. So I compare this, when you give a credit card to someone that has troubles to deal with his finances. So you can get, way overexcited with this idea because you are not paying it straight away. So for you to have an idea, in 2011, the PPP costs with these highways represented over 1% of the Portuguese GDP. So this is way too much. And we are still paying for these projects. Another thing that went wrong, I think there was a lack of political consensus about the projects and about the characteristics of these projects. And this is very important when you launch a project through the PPP model, because the PPP contracts, they last for much longer than the political cycle. So you need to be sure that all the political parties, as far as it possible, they agree with the project and the way it's being launched and with the characteristics and the way it's being delivered. So another thing that was very important, and we only learned it a bit too late, was that in 2012, we finally approved a legal framework for PPP projects, and we also create a PPP unit that oversees all the PPP projects that are done in Portugal. So with this legal framework and with this unit, we are able to ensure that all the best practices about PPPs are in one place and they are applied to all the Portuguese projects. They are done through this contracting model. So I will go now to our railway passenger network. So what you see here in this slide, you must be very familiar with these maps because they come from the European regulation for the transport for the Trans-European network. And you see in there that in Portugal, we have a lot of lines that are dashed lines. So this means they're planned, but they have not been built. So in reality, we should have finished our high-speed railway network that has several axes. I will show you better in the map, in the next map, by 2030. And we are quite late. So we are now at the end of 2024. We haven't started yet the construction. So we have all this network to be built in a short period of time to make sure that we are aligned with the deadlines that were set by the European Commission. And there's a very important target that we don't want to miss. That is to ensure that the high-speed passenger rail traffic doubles by 2030 and triples by 2050. So this was a target that was defined in the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy for Europe, and we are fully aligned with that. But we are a bit late on this target. So the map here shows the three axes for high speed that are on the core Trans-European network. So the first one is the link between Lisbon and Porto. So Lisbon and Porto are the two largest cities in Portugal. And this is the first project we are starting to build. So the project is going to be developed between 2025 and 2032. And the objective is to connect these two cities in 1 hour and 15 minutes. So the second project we're going to be working on is the high-speed line between Porto and Vigo, so with Spain, with the border with Spain. So if you see, this is an extension of that blue line that you see on the map. This project is going to be developed between 2028 and 2032. And finally, we have the high-speed line between Lisbon and Madrid, so the two capitals of Portugal and Spain. So this project is going to be built later. So before, when we start thinking about our high-speed network, this was our first project, but we shifted our priorities, and now we are starting with the Porto-Lisbon line, so the high-speed line within Portugal. And then we will start looking at the connections to Spain. So the objective for the high speed between Lisbon and Madrid is to connect the two cities in about 3 hours, just under the 3 hours, but is a time that is very competitive compared to the airplane. And for that, we need to make sure that between Lisbon and the border, the journey time is of around 1 hour. So this is what allows us to then reach Madrid in just under 3 hours. So my presentation today is focused on the high-speed line between Porto and Lisbon, because this is the line where we are working first. And so here you see the map that shows you that we are phasing the development of this line. To be very honest with you, we couldn't do it in one go because we wouldn't have enough money to do the project in one go. Also, we wouldn't have resources available in the country that would ensure that we can build this line that is a 300-kilometer line between the two cities. And therefore, we decided to phase the project. So this project is going to be installed in the Iberian Gauge. So I don't know if you know, but in Portugal and Spain, we have the gauge, so the width between the rails is different from the rest of Europe. So the Spanish, they build their high-speed network in the conventional standard UIC gauge, but we are starting developing our high-speed network in the Iberian gauge. And this is one of the reasons that allow us to phase the project. And why? Because, you know, while we build phase one, okay, the trains can start operating on the new section, and then they use for the rest of the trip, they use the conventional network that obviously is built in this Iberian Gorge. But the project we are doing is going to be built with polyvalent sleepers, so that will allow one day us to migrate to the UIC Gorge when this is needed. So the estimated investment for the three phases of the high-speed line is 7.5 billion euros. So I mentioned before that the objective in terms of the journey times is to connect Porto and Lisbon in 1 hour and 15 minutes. So currently the fastest train does this journey in 2 hours and 50 minutes. So we are talking here about a very significant reduction. So of course the journey times will also reduce along the corridor, but not only. So a lot of cities will benefit from this project. And this is because the high-speed line is fully integrated with our conventional railway system. So even a city that is not served directly by this high-speed line will also benefit from the journey time reductions. And I will explain you better this in the next slide. So in terms of the stations, we are using pretty much all of the existing stations. So the existing stations are being upgraded. So this avoids us to build new stations and spend money building new stations. They will be adapted to accommodate the high speed. There's different levels of interventions in different locations, depending on the quality of the existing station. But we are also building 2 new stations, one in Gaia, there is an underground station, and one in Leiria. So in terms of the integration with the existing network, so I mentioned 2 things. So the fact that we are building the project in this Iberian Gorge allow us to use the existing station. And the map to the right shows exactly this. So you see there Aveiro. So Aveiro is the 3rd biggest city in Portugal after Porto and Lisbon. So Aveiro, there is an existing station, a new station on the conventional network that is very well served by all means of transport, is a very good transport hub. So we didn't see the need to build a new station. Also, if you were to build a new station directly on the high-speed line, that is the blue line you see on the map to the right, will be a station that is quite far from the Aveiro city center. So people, to get to this station, they will need to get their car. And probably by the time that they take the car to go to this high-speed station, they just drive to Lisbon. They will not probably use the train. So what is happening? So a train that does a direct trip without stops between Porto and Lisbon, it follows that blue line. A train that is stopping in Aveiro, it follows the blue line, but then it uses that yellow link that is represented on the map to get in the conventional network. So the conventional network is the orange bit, the orange line. So a train that stops, goes in the blue line, uses the link to the orange line, stops in Aveiro, and comes back to the high-speed line, again through the conventional, and then through this small link. So in this way, we avoid spending money on a new station to serve this city, and we save money. And we are sure that we serve the city center so that we get the high-speed network closer to where the people live. Another thing that I mentioned before, it was this overall journey time reduction. So why is this? Because alongside with the high-speed trains, so on this line, on this new high-speed line, there will be direct trains, there will be stopping trains that, for example, a train that stops in Aveiro or Coimbra. So the model is the same that I'm explaining. Aveiro is just an example, but there's also what we call the hybrid services. And what are the hybrid services? These are services that run both on the high speed and on a conventional network. So for example, a train that departs from Lisbon, it goes to Coimbra, but it doesn't go back to the high speed line. It goes on the conventional line for Guarda, for example, that is 100 kilometers away from Coimbra. So imagine, although Guarda is really far away from this new high-speed line, the journey time between Lisbon and Guarda will reduce by over 1 hour. So this was very important for us to sell this project, because it's not only the cities that are along the Atlantic corridor that will benefit from this investment, but it's the entire country, on this logic that the 2 networks, the high speed and the conventional, are fully integrated. So in terms of the demand forecasts, so currently we have 11 long distance trains between Porto and Lisbon. These are the fastest trains, the one that I said to you that that the travel time between the two cities is of 2 hours and 50 minutes. And in the future, we can have up to 60 high-speed trains on these new lines. So this is a huge increase on the capacity, and we need this because currently these 11 trains are clearly not enough for the existing demand. They are always fully packed. So, as I said, there will be direct service, stopping services, and hybrid services on this network. So we expect that in the opening year of phase 2 of the high speed, we have an extra 10 million passengers using the railway. So this number is really good and is really compatible with the target I mentioned before about the smart mobility report. So in terms of the cost-benefit analysis, I think the socioeconomic indicators that you see on the screen, they talk for themselves. So there are huge benefits, socioeconomic benefits about this project. Obviously, the reduction in journey times contributes a lot to this, but there's also a lot of reduction in terms of the emissions that the project is gonna ensure. And there's a lot of other wider economic benefits associated with this project. And this also, of course, it's a very important, these indicators are very important to ensure that we get the financing that we need for this project. Because they translate in the importance of this to Portugal and to Europe. So now going to the PPP model more in detail. So one of the first, as Infrastructure Portugal, one of the first analyses we had to do, so when the government decided, okay, we want this project, it's a critical project, it's very important for the country, for development, economic development of Portugal, and they asked us to analyze what are the existing contracting models for this project. So most of our projects, they are done on a design. First, there's a bid for the design is done, is approved, and then there's another bid for the construction of this project. So it's the first column, the design, bid, build project. So 99% of our rail projects are developed through this contracting model. So then there's the design and build. So as to say that the same organization is responsible for the design and for the construction of the railway. And then in the third column, there is the PPP model. And here we only analyzed in the regime of the design, build, finance, and maintain. So operation was always outside of this. So we assessed the different criteria. We created different criteria, assessment criteria for this analysis. And we came to the conclusion that the PPP model was the best model for the high-speed project. And I'm not going to talk about all of these criteria because this would take almost 30 minutes, that is the time slot I have for this presentation, but I will talk to you about the main ones. So the first one I have in there highlighted is the reduced project life cycle costs. And this is why. This is because you have the same organization that is responsible for the design, for the construction, and for the maintenance of this infrastructure. So there's an holistic approach when they think about this project. And most of the times we don't see this happening in the traditional contracting model. So we have a company that is responsible for the design. They are not really too worried about how much this is going to cost, how difficult, how the phasement is going to work. So they are sure that they have a design that is compliant with all the regulations. So then when it comes the company that is going to build, they complain about the design. And then they don't really care about, okay, how much is it going to cost in the future to maintain? So when you have one single company that is responsible for all of these phases of the project, they think much more about the life cycle costs. So this is one of the key benefits of this. So another one is the optimization of internal resources. So Infrastructure Portugal, we are a very large company, one of the largest public companies in Portugal. We have around 3,000 people in our organization doing all sorts of things. So, for example, to give you an idea, we have in the last 6-7 years been running a program that is focused mainly on our freight railway network. And that program was worth 2 billion euros. And for all these 6-7 years, we used up all of our internal resources. So when I mentioned to you, this project cost 7.5 billion. So for us to be able to manage this project in the time frame we have, we will need to have 2-3 times the number of resources we have internally, and we cannot get those resources. So we couldn't really do this. So we prefer, to leave this to the private, to manage a lot of responsibilities we normally have when we contract through the other contracting models. And it's almost like a turnkey project where we have much less responsibility in terms of following and managing and making sure that the projects are delivered on time and on budget. So the last one is the adjusted allocation of project risks. So we are quite limited in the way we can allocate risks to the other type of models because we have, a legal framework that defines this. With the PPP model, we have more freedom. And obviously, because we have learned a lot from all of these highways PPPs we did in the past, we know exactly what is the best way to allocate the projects between the private partner and the public partner. And we have that flexibility with the PPP model that we don't have with the other one. So what I show you in this slide is a very important message that we had to think about. There is, okay, the PPP model is very good, but is not good for everything. So this means that, okay, we are using the PPP model for most of our high-speed projects. So everything that is the high-speed substructure and superstructural, rail structure and superstructure, we are using this design, build, and finance contract. Also to upgrade some of the stations, we are doing this, but not for everything. So for example, there's other additional supplementary projects that are needed to ensure that the high-speed model, operating model works. So for example, I'll give you an example. So we are building these 2 phases first, and then the entrance in Lisbon is going to be through the conventional line. But we don't have enough capacity on the conventional right now. So in any case, it needed to be upgraded from 2 tracks to 4 tracks. And this will allow the high-speed trains to enter in Lisbon and makes you that we will postpone the phase 3 of the project to much later on in time, because this phase would cost us a lot of money for a very little benefit. So this project is very complex. Why? Because there's trains operating on this line. There's thousands of trains that operate every week on this line. And we need to work very closely with the rail operators to make sure that during the works that will last for 4 to 5 years, the trains can run the best they can, and there's not many disruptions. So in the PPP model, where we, the railway infrastructure manager, don't have the control of what is working, this is very difficult. So we prefer to do it with the traditional model, where we have much more control of what is being done on a day-to-day basis. Also, smaller projects, very low risk. We thought, okay, then we will not gain much from doing this through a PPP model. So we are doing this through the traditional model. So the third bit is the signaling and telecommunications that goes on the high-speed line. And obviously, it's critical for the operation of this line. So in this case, we are doing a separate contract. So it's not included in the PPP. So it's done through a different contract. And why is that? There's 2 main reasons why we're doing that. And this is very different from what is done, for example, in Spain or in France, where they have also used the PPP model. So there's only 2-3 maximum, but in Portugal, normally there's only 2 manufacturers that bid for this type of contract. So if we were to include these on the PPP contract, we would be limiting the number of bids we can receive, because one supplier cannot be in more than one consortium. So this would limit the number of bids that we will receive. Secondly, the lifespan of this type of assets is very different from the lifespan of substructure of superstructure, where we are talking about 100 years for bridges and tunnels, and for example 30 years for the catenary. So these systems, they need to be replaced much more often, so it doesn't really match with the time frames of our PPP contracts. Also, from our analysis, from our benchmarks, these type of assets, they are the ones that most of the unavailability issues on a high-speed network, 70% of the time, is because of these type of systems. So our PPP is going to be paid on availability. So if the infrastructure is fully available, they receive 100%. If it's not fully available, they receive less. So most of the issues they would have in terms of availability would be because of these type of systems. But in reality, they cost very little compared to the risk they entail. So if you go to a bank asking for financing for a project like this, and you say, I'm going to be paid on availability, and there's this small black box that is the signaling and telecommunications that will cause most of our issues, availability issues, but they are worth very little in terms of the overall capex of the project. The banks don't like this because they don't understand how the system works. So we thought it was better in terms of value for money to exclude this, and we will bear the cost of availability of the system, and we'll do it separately from the PPP contract. So this is to show that, okay, we thought the PPP was the best option for part of the project, but we're not using for everything. And this is very important when you think about deploying this model. So now I'm going to talk here about the 2 PPP contracts and tenders that we have launched already. So we have launched 2 PPPs for these 2 PPPs form part of the phase 1 of the project. So the first 140 kilometers of this line. So I told you that in total is like 300. So this is almost half of it. So those contracts are very similar. So the 2 contracts will have a term of 30 years. So 5 years for the development, for the design and for the development, construction of this infrastructure, and then 25 years for availability, for the maintenance of this infrastructure. So in each one of these contracts, they are worth approximately in nominal values, capex of these projects is 2.225 million for each contract. And this capex was what was in our mind when we decided to split these in 2 contracts, because we thought that 2.25 to around 2 billion euros would be the right size for a contract of this nature. We thought if we were to combine phase 1 in 1 PPP, this would mean a capex of almost 5 billion euros. This would be too much for what is needed. So what is under the scope of each one of these contracts? So is the substructure, the railway substructure and superstructure, the electrical substations, the passenger stations, and those connections that I showed we're going to build between the high speed and the conventional ones, the ones that were the yellow bits on that first map. So what is the status of this contract? So PPP1 has been awarded in October, and the PPP2 tender is ongoing. We are expecting the bids now early in January next year. So in terms of the risk allocation, very briefly, so the private partner within these contracts, they have the risk for the design, for the construction, for the maintenance, for the land acquisition, and for the environmental permits that are needed after the contract award. So we already have an environmental permit for a section of 400 meters for a corridor. This is a condition, is a precondition for us to launch the PPP. So we cannot launch the PPP without to have the initial environmental permit. So what they need to do now is to do the final detailed design, submit to the environmental authority, and the environmental authority will say if this final detailed design fulfills the requirement of the permit that was already done in early stages. So in terms of the public partner, that is us, Infrastructure Portugal. So we bear the political, the planning, and the demand risk. So demand is on our side, so operation is outside of this contract. What is shared is the financing. So we are providing some of the finance of the money that is needed for this project, and you will see this later. So also the archaeological risks are shared. This is a very complex topic, but maybe for another time. In terms of availability is shared because, as I said, for example, in terms of the availability of the signaling and telecommunications, we bear that risk, obviously, because it's a contract that we are doing with the third party, and they bear the availability risk of the rest of the infrastructure that they are building. In terms of safety, it's also a shared risk. So in terms of the money, the investment and the financing. So the prices I show in there are slightly different from the ones from the previous slides because the other ones were nominal prices, and these are constant 2023 prices, real prices. So this is why there is a difference between the two numbers. So we are talking here in terms of 2023 prices of around 2 billion euros for each PPP. And we will have EU funds applied to each one of them. So this is around 875 million euros of funding that we received from CEF. So this will be split between the two PPPs. So we have more funds allocated to the first PPP because this is the first one that we are going to award. And because with the CEF, we have to make sure that all the works that are going to be deployed need to be finished by the end of 2028. So we decided to allocate more money to this first PPP because the risk of these works not being completed on time is lower than for the PPP2 that we have not yet awarded. Also, another very important source of financing for this project is a financing from the European Investment Bank. And because we knew this, we start working with them very early on. So I would say that almost 2 years ago, we approached the European Investment Bank. We told them about this project. And during a period of almost 1 year, we did a due diligence with them. So this resulted that this year, like April, the board of the European Investment Bank pre-approved a financing line of up to 3 billion euros to this phase 1 of our project. So this meant that in the tender documents that we released for these PPPs, we said to the bidders, look, you can go approach the European Investment Bank. They know about our project. They have pre-approved these financing lines, and they have a financing line available to you. Not all of these is direct funding. Only half of it is direct funding. And we are talking here about financing contracts which longer terms that those ones that the conventional, the commercial banks normally give on a project of this nature, and also much better interesting rates. So this is very good to reduce the cost of this project. So the bidders know that this financing line is there, is available, and we saw, for example, on PPP1 that they have used to the limit they could. So in terms of the EU funding, and I know you are very interested on this. So how have you used this EU funding on this project? It's not easy. So so just to say, we applied on the last call for 875 million. We received 813 million, so not the full application, but most of it, more than 800 million euros. This was huge. We have never received so much in terms of European funds to be deployed, but also this project is also huge for a country like Portugal. So there was here an element of risk that our government took. So in our first application, that was not in the last call, was in the previous one, we applied for 720 million and it was refused because they saw that our project was not mature enough, because they said, okay, you have not yet launched a bid, you have not yet awarded any bid. So we don't know exactly if you want to be in a position that you can guarantee that the project is going to be finished by the end of 2028. So they refused this. So we needed to take a risk here. So we knew that for the next application, we needed at least to have launched one of the bids, because this would prove to the European Commission and to SINEA that evaluates this bid that we were really serious about our project and the project was going to happen. So this is the thing. So we submitted the application for CEF at the end of January this year, and we launched the bid for PPP1 early January this year. So on the 12th of January, we launched the bid, and on the 21st of January, we submitted our application. So also we launched the PPP2 without knowing if this money was going to be awarded to us before the results of our application were known. So we wanted to make sure that in terms of the project maturity, we will have the right evaluation that will allow us to have access to this money. So what we told in the tender document to the bidder was, okay, we should assume that these funds, that these 875 million will be fully available. This was to avoid them to seek for additional private financing. Because if we were not telling them, or if we're saying, okay, we might receive this money, we might not, they say, okay, this is a very high risk. We need to account for this in our bids. So they would account, okay, we need to go look for financing and make sure that we can fill this gap in terms of the financing of the project. So what was said? We said in the documents, look, if our application is not successful, the government, the Portuguese government, will cover these payments to the concessionaire. So this was more like a state guarantee. We said, okay, regardless of whether the application is approved or not, we will pay you this money. And then I said, okay, fine. So we're not looking for financing for this bit of the project. So, of course, for the Portuguese government, this was a huge risk, but in reality, they could always decide, after the results of this process, to cancel. If the money was not awarded to Portugal in the CEF, they could decide, okay, of course, it would have a cost because they would have to pay some money to the bidders because they, of course, had costs to prepare all these bids, but this will be much smaller than them having to put the 875 million. So what we have in the tender documents as well is that as much as possible, they reflect the terms and conditions of the grant agreement. So as you know, the grant agreements for CEF, they are standard contracts. They are, the minute of this contract is available online. So you know more or less what these contracts will entail. So we try to reflect these conditions in the contract. So for example, we said, look, you're going to have access to this money, but you need to finish all the works before the end of 2028. Otherwise, you need to return some money back to us. Also, in terms of the payment mechanism. So we know exactly how the money is going to be given to us in terms of the CEF and what types of documents we need to show to SINEA to prove that, okay, we have paid this money to the concessionaire, but we have here these audits and we know that they have used this money. So all of these aspects of the grant agreement are as much as possible translated in our concession agreement for the PPPs. So finally, I've got here an example of what was the financing structure of PPP1. So this again is in nominal prices. So we're talking here about 2.4 million in terms of CapEx. So this is from their tender. This is not our simulation. This is from their tender. So they estimated a CapEx of 2.4 billion and OpEx of 400 million over the 25 years of availability. So they have used 480 million from European funds. Also, the government has paid 150 upfront. So this money is going to be paid to the concessionaire during the investment, during the construction period, to reduce the need for them to go and look for private financing. So then debt to equity, they have assumed a 9-to-10 ratio. From the European Investment Bank, so they have assumed a loan of 900 million. So this is the maximum they could. And the rest is senior debt from the commercial banks. And they have a shareholds internal rate of return of around 9%. So this is what I had to tell you about our high-speed line project between Porto and Lisbon. And here you see our full schedule. So this is the schedule for the entire project. So the lines I mentioned before, the corridors Porto-Lisbon, Porto-Vigo, and Lisbon-Madrid. So the timeframes are very similar. There's only here a lag between the projects. So normally we take in consideration 2 years for the studies. So this is the preliminary design for this project. After that, we submit this to environmental agency so that they can so that the environmental impact assessment can take place. That normally takes around 1 year. And then during this time, obviously, we start preparing the tenders. So the tenders are then launched, and from the moment we launch a tender until they can start the construction or these contracts become effective, we're talking here about 1.5 years. And then we have forecasted 4 years for them for the detailed design and for the construction of these infrastructures. And the schedule is very similar for each one of the projects. So we expect all of these projects to be deployed as PPPs. So you see here then between 2024 and 2034, we're talking here about 10 years. There's a lot of railways being built, a lot of works, a lot of money. It's a very ambitious schedule. I'm not entirely sure if we will be able to deliver all of these projects under these time scales, but this is what we are working on. And here at Infrastructures Portugal, we have a very dedicated team working on this and to make sure that we don't get late and that high speed is a reality in Portugal. We are late. We started thinking of this project 15, 20 years ago, it collapsed with economical crisis, but this time around, we are pretty sure that we can make it. And yeah, let's start from the beginning, start with the blue line and see what we can do with the rest. And this is what I had to present to you today. It's a shame I'm not there so that you cannot ask me questions, but you will have my email contact details for sure. They can be shared with you. And if you have any questions about what I told you today, please drop me a line. I'll be happy to respond, and hopefully in the next opportunity I will come to Latvia and I can meet you in person and respond to your questions and doubts at the time. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of this conference. Thank you.